Okay, hi again, everybody. Today, in this snippet, we're going to look at India and Pakistan. We're going to compare them. Comparative politics. India and Pakistan make a really good case comparison. Um, and let me remind you here, this is in your syllabus. We haven't really talked about it yet. But for your paper, you're going to be comparing two different countries on a topic, an issue. You're going to look at two countries currently and how those countries deal with any particular issue. Maybe it's immigration, maybe it's terrorism, maybe it's the environment, maybe it's LGBTQ, etc. Okay? The issue in the two countries are mostly up to you. You do need to get them approved by me, but there are a couple exceptions. You may not use the United States as one of your countries, and you may not compare Pakistan with India. Why is that? Because we're kind of going to do that here today. Okay? So between this snippet and the PowerPoint slides, what I'm going to do is provide you information about those two countries and ways that we can compare them. When we do our comparisons, what we're looking for interesting open questions. Why is country A different than country B on matter Z? Why do India and Pakistan make two good comparisons, make two good cases to compare? Because in a lot of ways, they're really alike, but in other very important ways, they're very different. So what explains those differences? That gets to the absolute essential heart, the foundation of comparative politics, trying to explain those differences. Now, why do India and Pakistan make two really good countries to compare? Because, as states, they're the exact same age. Whoa, dude, why? Because as states, as official countries with sovereignty and borders, they're the same age, they were born at the same time. In the PowerPoint slides, you'll see a link to a video, and I do expect everybody to watch the first 15 minutes or so of that video. I'll say this in an announcement, and that talks about the partition of India. The partition of India and Pakistan, which coincides with India's independence from the United Kingdom, from Great Britain. It happens on August 18th, 1947, 73 years ago. A long time ago, also not that long ago, right? There were a lot of different reasons India got its independence from Britain. One of them being that Britain could no longer afford to maintain a colony in India. India is an enormous place. This was Britain's most important colony. It's the treasure of the empire, but it had become exceedingly expensive to maintain. They were putting way more money into it than they were getting out of it. Also, it was after World War II. There were independence movements globally. It became morally questionable, morally indefensible for Britain to hold on to India. So it became a question of not so much whether or not India was going to get its independence, but when, how, and in what format. One of the biggest sticking points was what to do about different ethnicities inside of India. India is an enormous country, an enormous history. It has just an unbelievably high number of separate languages, and it has separate religions. The majority of Indians were and remain Hindus, but there is sizable minority of Muslims, and then also a fair number of Sikhs, and then some other religions here and there, including Christians. So, what to do, especially about Indians' sizable percentage of Muslims? The eventual solution was to create an independent Muslim state that would include what is today Pakistan and Bangladesh, which are actually separated from each other. But the original partition was Pakistan, which included Bangladesh, which later got its own independence. And this occurred because the vast majority of people living in those regions, in the Pakistan region, were Muslims. And so there were Muslims throughout India. And of course, today, there are a lot of Muslims in India. But what happened at that time, in a time period of rising tension, was almost a bloody nightmare, an ongoing bloody battle between the two ethnicities, the two religious groups, as this partition occurred, as independence approaches and this partition occurs. There are mass migration that takes place inside and India, and then to the region that becomes known as Pakistan, as Muslims, fearing living under Hindu majority rule, leave to go to Pakistan. Hindus and other religions who are in that area that would become Pakistan and Bangladesh leave to go back to India, and there's violence throughout the process. So they were born at the same time, which makes them roughly the same age as far as states go. How did they fare? And what we see today, 73 years later, is that both nations have made certain advances, progresses, economic development, etc. India generally much more so than Pakistan. They both continue to have problems. India continues to have ethnic, religious strife within its countries, especially between Muslims and the majority Hindus. Pakistan is almost entirely a country of Muslims, so they don't have that particular strife, but they have almost everything else in terms of ongoing problems. So India has, when you go in and look at the data, India has stronger economy. They have a faster growing economy, a little bit more stable. They've been a democracy since their independence that has generally been healthy, well contested, institutionalized, multi-party democracy. Meanwhile, Pakistan has had lower growth rates. They've had more strife. They've had much less political stability. So, what explains these differences? That's a central question, for huge open question for comparative politics. Without answering that, what I want to point to next here, and you'll see this in the slides, you'll get the link to the video, but you'll also see it in the slides, a page that has links to different websites. And what these websites contain is a wealth of data. Some of you may already be familiar with most of these websites, and some of you may not have seen any of them. That's fine. These websites are really useful for finding data that you on separate countries that you can compare to each other. One of them, the top link in this, is the World Bank link. I put that up top because it has the most data, and once you get the hang of it, it becomes fairly easy to use. Although, it's a World Bank website, so it's never going to be overly user-friendly. But at the page at the link on the PowerPoint slides, I have it set up where it's already comparing two countries. You can select as many countries as you want, but you can select two countries, Pakistan and India, and then there's some drop-down list where you can go and select different things you want to compare them on, and there's 50 or 100 different items, um, things related to childhood education, childhood health, overall economic growth, freedom, all kinds of different economic characteristics are measured there. And you can measure them over time too, and see that what has happened is India and Pakistan started out kind of similarly and on several different attributes. Pakistan was actually doing better than India. Over the last few decades, India has caught up and surpassed Pakistan on most things. So that's one website, is the World Bank. There's also a Heritage Foundation website that looks at economic, various economic freedoms, how free is a state, a country, in terms of this or that economic feature. There is a Freedom House, which rates political freedom in terms of civil liberties and the like. Civil liberties, political rights, freedom of the press, things like that. So you can go to the Freedom House link and compare Pakistan to India. You can go to the Transparency International site, which is the world's largest, most respected anti-corruption NGO. And there you can find a wealth of information and compare Pakistan to India. India generally is a fairly corrupt country, and Pakistan significantly more corrupt. And on and on. There are other websites. I won't go through the full list there, but you can check them out on the PowerPoint slides. Why do I show you this? Because for comparativists, this kind of collection, data collection and comparison is paramount. It's hugely important. In your research papers, you should be trying to find data. And so, no matter what the issue is that you're studying, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be able to find data from the PowerPoint, from the links on that PowerPoint slide. So you should definitely reference that at least, or check it out at least when you're preparing your paper, when you're starting out on your paper. Okay? So that's it for this snippet. Just the very, very basics of the similarities and difference, the history of Pakistan and India, and then a jumping off point, a useful jumping off point, that PowerPoint slide for starting your research, collecting data. Okay. See you for the next snippets, people.